the great pleasure of introducing our guest speaker, Mr. Carl Denninger, a man who is most assuredly not afraid to tell the truth. Carl is the author of Leverage, How Cheap Money Will Destroy the World, and is widely credited as one of the original founders of the Tea Party movement. It was he that suggested mailing a tea bag to Congress in January of 2009 to protest the stimulus and the bailouts. Carl received the 2008 Reed Urban Accuracy and Media Award for grassroots journalism for his coverage of the 2008 market meltdown. Carl is the former CEO of MCSNet, a regional Chicago area networking and internet company that operated from 1987 to 1998. MCSNet was proud to offer several firsts in the internet service space, including integral customer specified spam filtering for all customers and the first virtual web server available to the general public. Carl's other accomplishments include the design and construction of regional and national IP-based networks and development of electronic conferencing software reaching back to the 1980s. Carl's been a full-time trader since 1998, author of the Market Ticker, marketticker.org, a daily market commentary and operator of Ticker Forum, and online trading community both since 2007. And I'm a computer guy, so I can appreciate all the stuff I just said. So, I work in that industry, so this guy has done a lot of good stuff. Please join me in giving Carl a warm welcome to the Space Pitch. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, you have to excuse me for just a moment here because I have to change the presentation over. And while I'm doing that, you may want to head back to the bar because there's some hard truths coming here and you might need a drink. All right. Well, I threatened to grab the microphone and walk around the room, but probably not going to do that for a couple of reasons, the most important of which is that I suspect you'd like to be able to divide your attention between myself and the screen over here. So in the interest of that, and also giving our intrepid photographer here the opportunity to snap all the pictures he wants, I'll probably stay up here. Let's ask the question, ladies and gentlemen, what's the largest threat today to liberty in America? Is it problems with oil supply? Is it the military and threats to our military sovereignty and our ability to maintain a strong military force? Is it terrorism? We just saw some of that recently over in Egypt, Libya, and other parts of the world. By the way, there was apparently an attempt to blow up a bar in Chicago last night. Just saw that as I was on my way over here to give this presentation. So terrorism is certainly a risk. Is it gun control? How about medical care? How about the cost and availability of education? We have this problem in our country right now with access to education and how people pay for it. How about how the government funds itself? Deficits, taxes, or is it the Supreme Court? Abortion, all the other social issues, gay marriage, everything that goes into this, and what, of course, goes on in the judicial branch. Or is it this guy? We all know who he is, right? I don't think I need a caption on that picture. All right, let's talk a little bit about economic ground rules, because most of what I'm going to talk about tonight is, in one way or another, related to the economy. You know, that nasty thing that we're all dealing with right now with unemployment where it is? Okay. First rule is everything you cite has to have a reference. Nobody gets to play trust me, and we hear that a lot, right? I will do, from some politician. He says, I will fix Medicare. I will fix Social Security. Yeah, I think that was trust me was on the end of that sentence. Past performance is not a guarantee of future results, but it's the best we've got. And I've never seen anyone come up with a better way to show you what's going to happen than to look at what they've done in the past and what the outcome has been. And if you claim you can change something, you have to explain exactly what you're going to do. How many people in this room have heard political promises that are one sentence? They promise to make huge changes in your life for the good, and the details will come later. Hello, Nancy Pelosi, you have to pass this bill before you can read it. All right. Let's look at economic history. You're going to see this chart and its excerpts a lot. The red line is gross domestic product, that is the product of everything we make in this country, goods and services. And the blue line is this nasty little thing called debt. You've all seen debt, right? We all know about mortgages, car payments, all that fun stuff. Okay, up until 1970, ladies and gentlemen, they were in balance. As we grew our economy after World War II and through the 1960s and into 1970, debt in the system, and this is all debt, not just the government, not just deficit spending, but all debt in the economy grew at approximately the same rate as did production. That is balance. But notice what happens towards the end of this period. And that chart, by the way, goes very start of 1980. You'll see that they started to separate. We started to add more debt into the economy. Why? Because we had a little problem with oil. Anybody remember that? Little bad guys over there in Arab states that really didn't like us very much. We had a little embargo. All right, well, rather than deal with things honestly, we decided to start to cheat. And then it got really bad. Who in this room believes that if you have a Republican president and a Republican Congress, you're going to get less deficits and less debt in the system compared to Democratic ones? Okay. Nobody really believes that Democrats will cut it either, right? I mean, I don't know anybody that is that crazy. All right. The truth, ladies and gentlemen, is that here we have everybody from 1970 forward, all the administrations, red and blue, and you can see that neither of them did the right thing at any point in time. So we got a little problem here. And oh, by the way, before you say, oh, but wait, it looks like Obama did kind of okay, remember that we had a little thing called a crash in there. That debt didn't come out because people wanted it to. It came out because people couldn't pay. When you lose your house, that's called a default. That's bad, not good. All right, so if we want to look at this another way, this is gross domestic product and the total debt in the system, along with, on the right-hand side, the ratio of debt to GDP. This is the mess that we face today. This is what we've done in this country. And this is what we have to deal with head on. So who is in debt? Well, the Federal Reserve publishes this really nifty little thing. It's this huge document. It's basically a big spreadsheet. It comes out every 3 months. It's called the Z1. And the Z1 tells you where all the credit is in the system and who holds it. And what you'll see here is a very curious thing. If you look over towards the end, right here where we had the little crash, okay, this is 2008, you'll notice that this section here, which is bank credit between banks for financial instruments, all the games that they play with derivatives and oil contracts and gold futures and all that other stuff, that contracted and nothing else really shrunk very much. And why is that important? Because this piece right here skyrocketed. That's the federal government. And where did all the money go? Not to you. So here's the truth about so-called deleveraging. You all hear this every day. I don't care if you listen to CNN or Fox News, you're going to hear the same thing. The economy has been deleveraging. CNBC likes to say this a lot too. There hasn't been any. Household mortgage credit has contracted by about 9%. But as anybody who owns a house or has bought or sold a house knows, over the last 4 years, house prices have gone down a whole lot more than 9%. In fact, Case-Shiller says it's almost 50%. Now, I think they're more than a little pessimistic on that because they just pick up the 20 largest cities, so they don't count all the farmland and everything else. But it certainly has been a third, and as a result, the leverage in the system has actually gone up. Non-financial corporate credit, that is, credit for various business entities, never contracted at all. How many people in this room have heard politicians and Ben Bernanke say, it's impossible for businesses to get the credit they need to operate? Can I see a show of hands on that? Has anybody heard that phrase? It's really hard to get a loan? Well, guess what? The numbers say the corporate credit hasn't gone down at all. But the federal government's public debt has doubled since 2007. And every last dime of it went to the banks to keep them from going bankrupt. None of it went to you, I, and everybody else in this room, unless you work for JP Morgan, in which case I am talking about you. All right. You know that section where we had financials, the little green section that contracted a little bit during the crash. People say that the financial industry has delevered and is now safe and sound. This is what they've actually done, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, it has contracted a little bit, but compared to history, like back in the, say, 1980s, contracted and is now safe and sound. It's 4 times where it was in the 1980s. That's not safe and sound. All they've done is cover up the imminent destruction of their businesses. They haven't actually taken the leverage out of their balance sheets at all. And by the way, same thing with home prices and mortgages. We hear that a lot, that homeowners have delevered and that the economy is getting better in the housing market. Sorry folks, this chart says there's another 50% decline coming in house prices. I know you don't want to hear that. I said you needed a drink, right? The bartender's still back there. Now, they will, of course, in the government, try to do everything in their power to keep that from happening. Believe me. So, what is the Fed's actual job? I'm going to read this to you because it seems as though we have this problem with laws in this country. And you'll notice where the period is at the end of this statement. I'm going to read it verbatim for those of you that are far back in the room and can't see it clearly. The Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve System and the Federal Open Market Committee, that would be Ben Bernanke and his pals, shall, important word here, maintain long-run growth of monetary and credit aggregates commensurate with the economy's long-run potential to increase production. There's your GDP thing. So as to promote effectively the goals of maximum employment, stable prices, and moderate long-term interest rates. Okay, there's a period at the end of that sentence. There's something missing. What's missing is, or you will go to jail for 20 years. Here's the problem. Stable means unchanging. For 100 years, serially, the Federal Reserve has intentionally, willfully, and wantonly violated their mandate on purpose. And neither of our major political parties has done a thing about it. Not only is there no mandate in the mandate, because there is no penalty, they haven't done anything to change the law and add one. I would put forward, and oh, by the way, 2% inflation? No. Over the last 100 years, it's been about 3%, so they're 50% off on the high side, pretty much on a continual basis. That's the history. I'm willing to bet that we would have zero inflation in an afternoon if Congress was to amend that law to say, or you will all do 20 years in the federal can. The truth about money, folks, is fairly simple. In a fiat currency world, all money is in fact debt. Pretty much everyone in this room probably has 3 things in your pocket. You probably have dollar bills of some denomination. You probably have credit cards, 1 or more. And most of you probably have some coins. Might be interested to know that of those, the only component of money that you have on you that does not bear interest and is not debt is your coins. So all the, when we talked about hope and change, change is all you have left, and that's the only part that doesn't bear debt. The Fed's charter to regulate credit and money is in fact the correct approach. But if you grow credit faster than output, purchasing power is destroyed. Here's something that most people have problems getting their arms around, but it is nonetheless true. And you know it because you did it today, yesterday, every year. You've done it every year of your adult life. You pull into the gas station and you put a credit card in the pump and you pump your gas, right? Pretty much everybody in this room does that. Not very many people will pump the gas and then go pay with a $20 bill up at the front, although you could. When you did that, you used credit, that is money that didn't yet exist, and what did you promise? You promised you'd get up and go to work tomorrow. That's what you did, because that's the only thing that backed that credit card. That money spends exactly the same way that the $100 bill spends that you earned at your job. And so the only way to look at inflation and everything else in the economy is based upon the amount of credit that is outstanding. You will never hear Ben Bernanke or any of the other mainstream economists talk about this, because if they did, there'd be a revolution by morning. So this is why we have no recovery. QE cannot work. It can't work because for every dollar of additional credit you emit into the economy, $1 of purchasing power is destroyed. If we take 10,000 units of production and we have 10,000 units of currency and credit, and we double the amount of currency and credit in the system, you now need 2 units of currency to buy 1 unit of production. See, we play games with our economic statistics. We denominate GDP in dollars, and then we denominate debt and credit in dollars, and therefore we play this little shell game. But if I take a $20 bill out of my left pocket and put it in my right, I still only have 20 bucks. So the latest QE, it was just announced this week, assuming a 50 basis point reduction in mortgages, which by the way is ridiculously optimistic. Okay, the best estimates that I have and most other people's about half of that. Under that assumption, you would see an approximate 3% change in home prices upwards. That's all. 3%. And this is very easy to figure out. You can get out your little financial calculator and figure out what the mortgage amount is on a loan of a given size at today's rates, and then take 0.5% of interest off of that, and then run the calculation backwards, and then it'll tell you how much a home price goes up. It's about 3%. Purchasing power destruction continues every single month until the Fed stops this, and the reality is that when you kill purchasing power, you kill jobs. 4 million jobs, huh? That's what we keep hearing, that there's been 4 million jobs created. Yeah. Okay. This is the labor participation rate, ladies and gentlemen. This is the percentage of working age population people who actually are working. QE began the first program in November of 2008. At that point, we were at approximately a 62% population employment ratio. Today, we are at about 58, and we've been there for the last 3 years. It hasn't moved because it can't move. What they're doing is not going to fix the problem. There is a particular definition of insanity that Einstein once used, and that is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. There's another way to think about this. If you hit yourself in the head with a hammer and it hurts, why do you want to do it again? Here's the second part of the truth on employment. And this is the other part that nobody wants to talk about because it goes to offshoring and the destruction of American competitiveness over the last 2 decades. This chart only goes back to 2000 because that's the first place I can get accurate figures to compute this with. And what this is the annualized monthly change in employment adjusted for population. Now this is not something you ever hear people talk about, but this is what matters because we put about 150,000 people of working age into the population every month. So in order for us to just stay even in the employment report, when you hear people talk about 90,000 jobs added, that means we lost 60. All right? What this tells you is that from 2000 on, from the start of the tech wreck, we've not had a positive employment picture in this country since. We covered it up by blowing bubbles in the housing market. And this was an intentional act undertaken by our central bank and both of the political parties. So why don't politicians stop it if it's so destructive? Because if you offshore production, you produce trade deficits. And that takes your capital out. If I produce all of my DVD players in China, when I buy them in the United States, I have to send money to China to pay for them. Well, if you don't play currency games with the credit system, then what ends up happening is all your money ends up over there. Their currency gets extremely strong, yours gets extremely weak because all your capital's gone, their price goes up. Well, that cuts off the game with the exports, doesn't it? It also cuts off offshoring all your labor. So what did our government do? To maintain the illusion of stable policy, they just started spending like drunken sailors. Oh wait, I'm sorry, that's an insult to anybody that was actually in the Navy. Drunken sailors actually stop spending when they run out of money. So, this is the reality of inflation, folks. When you add to the credit supply, that is inflation. And that's what we've seen for the last 30 years. When you hear talk about stable inflation expectations, remember that Bernanke always puts the word expectations on the back of that. He does that for a reason, because he's not talking about actual inflation. He's talking about what you think is going to happen. That means it's a con job. So what's it really look like? Well, Friedman got this right. He said in 1963, inflation is always and everywhere a monetary phenomenon. That's all it is. And when you look at simply based upon credit growth, you'll see that in 2007, just before the crash, we actually got up to 25% annualized inflation. Not 3%, not 2%, not 4%, 25%. We put, in this country, more than $1.5 trillion in new debt into the system, and for that we got $200 billion worth of domestic output. Now if you think about how stupid that is, every dollar of debt you put into the system is supposed to buy $1 of production, right? Because why would you take out a loan if you didn't buy something with it? So what does this tell you about what was really happening? It tells you that everybody was going broke fast. They were just taking out more loans to pay the interest. And that's exactly what happened. That's why we hit the wall. So about that debt to GDP problem that we have here, that's, yeah, that chart keeps showing up. I don't know why. Maybe it's because it's trying to tell us something. There is another little truism that comes up too, which is that you really don't care whether or not that piece of bread or that drink that you have on your table in front of you costs $5 or $2, as long as your salary keeps up. In other words, if I happen to have $100 and I need to buy $100 worth of groceries, that's exactly the same thing as if I have $1,000 and need to buy $1,000 worth of groceries. It doesn't make any difference to me what the units are. Okay. So let's plot those two, and that's what I've done here. You'll see that up until about 1982, when we had the really nasty early 1980s recession, we actually managed to keep up more or less with income, but from that point onward, we did not. And this is why we face the economic problems we have both personally and at the government level today. This is the bottom line. When you get down to it, from your perspective, from everybody else's perspective in the economy, it all comes down to how much you can spend, and you're being stolen from, essentially. There is a distortion in here that I'm going to take out in the next slide. I don't know if anybody noticed it, but you would think that maybe President Obama wasn't all that big of a snake, because over on the right-hand side it looks like income is going up faster than inflation is. There is a problem, and that is that included in that debt number is all of the games with the banks handing money back and forth to themselves and pledging money that they don't have in order to cover all their derivative bets. The problem is none of that ever gets into the real economy. It's never loaned out to your business, it's never given to you to buy a car or a house or anything else. So we have to take that out. And if we do, we get this. One subtracted from the other, taking the financial institution credit out of the system first. And what you see here is that up until the 1980s, the early 80s, we actually had real economic progress for everybody in this country. We had a couple of fairly decent recessions, but for the most part, everybody did okay. Between productivity and actual salary improvements, we were seeing 5, sometimes 10% increases in actual purchasing power all the way up until the early 1980s. I don't care how you slice it, that's pretty darn good. And then through the 1980s and 1990s, we essentially made no ground, either plus or minus, until 2000, when the tech market came apart, and instead of facing what had happened, we blew a huge bubble in credit and handed everybody a get-out-of-jail-free card in the form of an ATM machine called their house. So here's the reality of compound growth and what we're in for if we don't stop this right now. And when I say right now, ladies and gentlemen, I really do mean it. I took that picture, by the way. I like to scuba dive. We are the fish, and we live in a pond. We happen to live on a rock called Earth. It's a finite size and mass. It has finite resources. Anybody that would like to figure out how to do the old Star Trek thing, I'm all ears, but right now we haven't figured that out. So we put one lily in there, and that represents our debt, and it produces food, but it also covers space, and it reproduces once a day. So 3 days go by, and now there's a lot of food, because there's more lilies. Growth is great. Everybody rejoices until 2 more days go by, and food is now so abundant that we don't seem to need to pay much for it. But there's a couple people that wonder whether or not this was really such a good idea to put that plant in the pond. 2 more days pass, and now there are dark spots under the water. The alarm goes up, and what do we hear from the politicians? We must deal with this problem in the medium term. We can't harm the economy right now. Hello, Ben Bernanke. 2 more days go by. The pond is now 25% covered. Food, and by the way, if you haven't figured it out, that's money or credit, is now so plentiful that it's free. Hello, 0 interest rates. Does anybody know what happens 2 days from now? You're all dead. Now here's the bad news. You have to kill half the lilies in that pond every single day from this point forward, or you die. When there were only a few lilies, that was easy. You could eat a couple, or 5, or 6, or 8, and it was no problem. Now you have to eat 1,024 lilies. And if you manage to do it today, you must do it again tomorrow, because they keep reproducing. The only way you can make headway is to kill more of them than reproduce. This is a little bit of a problem. Did we do something like this with debt? Nah, we didn't do anything like that, did we? I pulled these two charts out of the Fed Z1 and the GDP series. These are also in my book. We, since 1953, have run approximately a 4% growth rate from that entire period. Some years more, some years less, but that's been the average. And we have added approximately 7% to our systemic debt during that time. Notice that the debt curve has this nasty way of running away from the growth curve. That's 50 years in the first one. The second one's the really bad news. That's what happens if you keep doing it for another 50 years. And here's the really ugly part of that. It's that bottom graph, which is very hard to see, and that is the interest payments on that debt, assuming that you have to pay 6%. By the time you get 100 years out, it's crossed over the total amount of money you have. That you obviously can't do, right? Because now you don't have anything to buy your food with. So this is where we're headed. And by the way, that unemployment rate, that employment rate graph, only employed people pay taxes. There is this little problem with that, right? If we want to boost taxes in order to try to close the deficit, we got this problem because only employed people pay taxes. Unemployed people don't. So, how bad is the budget? How many people have seen this chart or something that looks like it? Can I see some hands? A couple? A few? Okay. This is the one that nobody wants to talk about, but we have to have this discussion. Defense takes up about $900 billion all in. About 750 of that is actual DOD, the rest is veterans in one form or another. And most of veterans' expenses are in fact in healthcare. So you could take that and move it down into the healthcare area if you wanted to. Healthcare is of course the other big one, that's Medicare, Medicaid. And then general welfare, family and services. Unemployment, housing, and general welfare. Housing is Section 8 for the most part. General welfare, by the way, includes SNAP, that's food stamps. And deficit projected for this year, we're not quite done yet, but it looks like it's going to be about $1,100 billion. Here's the problem with this chart, folks. That's a $3.8 trillion budget. So if you want to get rid of the deficit, you have to do about that. In other words, no Social Security, half of Medicare and Medicaid, and you can have everything else. Or we can have all of our defense, we can pay about 1/3 of medical care and nothing else. Or, if we want to, we could pay for defense, most of Social Security and Medicare and all the other things. And oh, by the way, when you hear people talk about getting rid of things like the education department or miscellaneous spending or fraud, waste, and abuse, show me how big a slice of the pie that happens to be. Because when we talk about, for example, education, that's 4% of the budget. It's infinitesimal. The problem, ladies and gentlemen, rests in two places: health spending and defense. It's that simple. Social Security is for the most part self-funding. It can be fixed by indexing retirement ages to longevity. And any politician that tries to tell you otherwise is lying. They all try to put Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid together because it's the only way they can sell what they want to do. So here's the reality. You cannot pursue a glide path. Every day you wait makes this worse. That's what the lily pad example shows you. Basic exponential math. Two compound functions always run away from each other. MF Global, Abacus, AIG, Peregrine, Jefferson County. By the way, who in this room knows about Jefferson County, Alabama, and what happened to them? Anybody here? Yeah. We have a number of large banks in this country that seem to think that they could talk people into doing swap arrangements for their debt. Jefferson County had some people that took bribes within their government. Real, honest-to-God bribes. And I can stand up here and say this without being sued for libel because people went to prison for it. So they've been found guilty and convicted and are gone. But the last time I checked, to give a bribe, someone has to get a bribe and vice versa. So if people got a bribe, why did the people who gave the bribe not go to jail? And secondly, and far more importantly, why is it that the people of Jefferson County today, having been bilked by this fraudulent scheme, are still paying sewer and water bills 400% above where they were before this happened? 400%. What would you do, or how would you do it, if your water bill quadrupled? Because it did happen in Alabama. That's 600,000 people, by the way. It's not a small area either. It's better than 500,000. How do we get back to sound money? It's not gold. It's $1 of capital. Each dollar of unbacked credit has to have a dollar of real capital behind it. I don't care if you sell bonds, I don't care if you sell stock, I don't care if you retain earnings. You cannot create money out of thin air. This is why we're in this mess. The people who push gold as a hard money standard and do not fix this will do exactly nothing except handing control of the money supply, inflation, deflation, and depressions to a bunch of South African warlords. Now look, I don't like Ben Bernanke any more than a lot of other people, but I like him better than those people. The only way to keep this honest is to have every asset marked to market nightly and no netting of positions. We have to stop this, and we have to stop it now. So let's say we don't. Let's say that we go on our way and we just do what we're doing. What kills us first? We have two sets of linked issues. Healthcare and the federal budget, and the second one is defense and energy. Medicare and Medicaid are not the problem, ladies and gentlemen, it's the healthcare system. Federal medical spending went from $53 billion in 1980 to $850 billion last year. That's a 9.3 compounded growth rate. That means it doubles every 7.7 years. You have probably all heard politicians tell you that for anyone 50 or older, they're not going to see their Medicare touched. Is there anyone in this room that hasn't heard that promise? Okay, I didn't think so. I've heard it more times than I can count. For that promise to be kept, the federal government would have to spend $11 trillion by the time a 50-year-old person is 85. That is almost 3 times the size of the entire federal budget today. They are lying. We spend $2.6 trillion on medical care in this country today. That is over $8,100 per man, woman, and child every single year. That is at least double the long-run sustainable level of medical spending. Healthcare, at best, whether you like it or not, is a cost shift. It allows you to do work that you otherwise couldn't do. It makes your quality of life better, but it does not actually add to GDP, at least not directly. Think of health spending as a tax, because to a large degree it is. Now in some cases it's a necessary tax. If you need to go to the doctor, you're going to pay because guess what? You're sick, otherwise you wouldn't be going, right? But we spend today on healthcare what Argentina produces per capita, and more than double what China does. So for what each of us spend on average in this room on healthcare every year, 2 people in China produce. That's insane. Neither Obama or Romney addressed this. Both are focused on the entitlement side. By the way, I hope everybody in this room realizes that Obamacare actually takes several $100 billion out of Medicare over the next 10 years. And nobody wants to talk about that on the left, of course, but that's the reality of it. Romney says he's going to block grant things because he's essentially adopted Ryan's plan. Again, shifting a $20 bill from your left pocket to your right pocket, putting it on the states, does not make you $20 richer. Okay? It just means the state goes bankrupt instead of the federal government. Problem with the medical industry is that it is rife with cost shifting and monopoly protections, and all of them exist only because the government is involved. You cannot today get in your car, drive to Canada, load up the trunk with Viagra, come back here in the United States after paying $2 a pill for it up there, and sell it for $2.05. You'll go to federal prison if you try that, because it sells for 25 bucks. And the reason you go to federal prison is because the government passed a special law that says that you can't re-import drugs and devices. And this means that we, 330 million of us in America, pay for the development of every single advanced therapy that has been developed for the last 35 years. And the rest of the world gets to use it for free. Now, there's 5 billion of them and 330 million of us, and we cannot afford to do this anymore. In addition, you got a bunch of other problems. But just to illustrate, in 1963, and I picked on that year because that happens to be the year I was born, childbirth cost $120.55. How do I know? Because I found a receipt that somebody scanned and posted on the internet from a hospital, itemized, not just a one-line bill, including the charge for the doctor, including the charge for the medications, including 4 nights in a hospital room. 4 nights to have a baby. Boy, oh boy, nobody gets to do that anymore, do they? If you took the CPI, which is the government's so-called official measure of inflation, and inflated that $120.55, it would be about $950. Is there anyone in this room that thinks you can have a baby in today's world? A very common, uncomplicated medical procedure that millions of women undergo every single year for $1,000. Absolutely not. Add a 0, and that's if you're lucky. You are being built, ladies and gentlemen. Everybody in this room is being built. If you want another example, Google up the Oklahoma Surgery Center and take a look at their price list. They take cash, not insurance and other medical plans, and their charges for fairly complicated procedures tend to run about 1/5 of what you would find you'd be charged in most other hospitals. The difference is they just take money. Current path, talk and do nothing. Baby boomers are coming into the system. By 2040, most of the baby boomers will be through the system. That is, they'll be worm food. That probably includes me. The problem is we aren't going to get there. Healthcare is going to collapse if we don't fix this, folks, and it will force a single-payer system, much like Canada has, and an economic depression. And Bernanke is making it worse. We don't have any leaders on this. We can fix this, but to do it, we have to do 2 things. We have to get rid of EMTALA. Does anybody know what EMTALA is? Can I see some hands? Anybody ever heard that word before? All right, EMTALA is a 1980s era law passed by Ronald Reagan. It is the law that says that if you're walking down the street and have a heart attack, that you must be taken to the closest hospital that can treat you, regardless of whether you have insurance or money. They must treat you, and then they have to figure out how to deal with that. That is the reason that Juanita, the illegal Mexican immigrant, can come into this country 7 months pregnant, on drugs, full of alcohol, drunk out of her mind, go into labor 2 months premature, run up a $2 million NICU bill with absolutely no way to pay for it, and when you have to have your appendix taken out, it costs 5 times as much as it should because you paid for part of her childbirth. This is why it happens. And neither one of the political parties will touch this, because the fact of the matter is nobody wants to deal with the fact that A, we're all mortal, and B, we all make choices. We have to go to level billing. We have to enforce this. It is illegal in most lines of work to change what you charge somebody simply based on how they pay. Been a lot of lawsuits over this. You know, you can't even do that with credit cards versus cash these days. It's been that way for 25 years. And yet, whether you pay with insurance or whether you pay with cash has a huge difference, or in Medicare or Medicaid for that matter, on what you pay for a particular medical procedure. We have to get rid of the monopoly protections. The bottom line is we have to take 50% off of our healthcare expenditures right now. Now, this is very politically incorrect. It has to happen. Next area, the other one. Military, foreign policy, and energy. And we had some examples of just how much those Arabs love us. Oh my gosh, they really do, don't they? They show their love with AK-47s and RPGs every single day. Yeah. We spend about $750 billion a year directly and another $100 billion in VA benefits. About half of that is spent in one form or another to protect foreign energy access. We're addicted to foreign oil because we've spent 40 years with our head jammed up our posterior on the fact that we like to use energy and we don't want to develop it here in the United States. There are solutions, but they do not involve sticking more straws in the ground. Oil is a finite, depleting resource. The facts are that we use energy and diesel fuel for our transportation because it is extremely energy dense. It is the only known way in today's world to get 110,000 BTUs of energy in a 1-gallon can. I wish there was another answer to this, but there is not. All of the people who want to talk about solar power and battery-powered cars and also they're not, it's claptrap. You can't get around the laws of thermodynamics. They're not suggestions. And as a result, we cannot drill our way out of this mess. There just isn't any way to do it. And eventually, Saudi Arabia, Venezuela, and all those other places that have so much oil now, they're not going to have it either because we're going to burn it all up. That's already starting. There are already suggestions that Saudi Arabia is lying about the capacity that they have to pump additional oil. They, of course, have no reason to tell the truth. They are, after all, a monarchy. So defense realities. Remember, we're talking about taking huge amounts of spending out of the federal budget. We have to find a way to cut defense spending in half without cutting off our energy supplies. For those people who think that we can just turn around and walk away out of the Middle East today, just pull in our fangs, pull our ships back, pull our troops back, close all our embassies, you know, we got all these bases over there, all over the place. Just say goodbye, come home, there'll be a war tomorrow. And the price of oil will go to $350 a barrel in an afternoon. By the way, you know the truck that brings your groceries to the store so you can buy them? Guess what it runs on? That could be a problem. At the same time, we have budget and energy constraints ourselves. If we get into a war situation over that kind of a circumstance, that's not very conducive to effective war fighting. All right? Afghanistan, Iran, Iraq, all part of the same problem. Along with wonderful people like Hosni Mubarak, that we were greatly involved in installing and maintaining in power for an extended period of time. Not everybody that we've supported has been a particularly nice guy. So, energy realities, to go along with the military realities. ERE-OEI, energy return on energy invested, must be positive. In other words, if you spend more energy getting the oil out of the ground than you get when you burn it, you are wasting your time. What we can recover is, of course, directly related to how much we're willing to pay, but all natural sources of hydrocarbons, whether it be gas, oil, or anything else, are finite. And here's the other part that nobody wants to speak of. When you take the amount of oil that we import every year and you divide it by the amount of money we spend on defense to make sure it gets here, the price of oil is $100 a barrel higher than what we are quoted. It's not $100 a barrel, it's $200 a barrel. The other half is a tax, essentially, because it goes in through the Defense Department to make sure that we have access to that oil. So we have potential answers. You probably haven't seen this before unless you've been reading my stuff. It's a nuclear reactor, but fueled not with uranium, with thorium. Produces 1/10 as much waste as conventional nuclear power plants. We have a number of nuclear power plants here in Florida, but we have some problems, including Obama and his buddies at the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. Does anybody know who JASCO is? Anybody ever heard that name? Oh, we got one hand up here. JASCO illegally shut down Yucca Flats, which was where we were going to put a lot of this high-level waste. When you don't have anywhere to put the waste and it keeps piling up, eventually you have to turn plants off. So if you like your electricity very expensive, you're going to get it in the next 3 to 5 years on the road that we're on because there is no longer anywhere to put the waste, and as the nuclear plant's storage capacity fills up, they will have to be turned off. That means that our capacity to produce electricity using conventional nuclear power is going to come to an end within the next 5 years. And in fact, there's already a freeze on new and renewals for licenses that went into effect a couple of months ago. Why didn't we use this back in the 1960s and 70s when we were developing this? It's very simple. This particular fuel cycle is useless for making weapons. And there's a lot of very complicated technical reasons for that, but it probably would bore you to tears if I went into them. Sufficient to say that this is extremely proliferation resistant. You can't make bombs out of this fuel cycle at all. And here's the other thing that's interesting. We know how to build them. This isn't pie in the sky. This isn't crazy Carl up here talking about something that's never been done before. We ran one of these reactors at Oak Ridge in Tennessee in the 1950s and 60s. We were, this is crazy, we were trying to figure out how to stuff one into an airplane and use it as a power source. This was back when we all thought that we in the Soviet Union were going to blow ourselves to bits. Yeah. By the way, that plan did not work. to put it in a plane. But the reactor did. It ran for 4 years, including 1 year at full power. So we know this technology is viable. It's safer, but, there's always a but, does not run at high pressure. It doesn't have any Fukushima risk because it doesn't need pumps to run in order to shut down safely if something goes wrong. However, it does require exotic materials for the actual piping because the working fluid is very corrosive. The good news is we know how to make that stuff because we use it today in chemical plants to make all kinds of nasty chemical things that we use in other industrial processes. It requires online reprocessing of the fuel, which is something that Jimmy Carter killed on purpose. And by the way, for those of you that aren't aware, Jimmy Carter was a nuclear engineer. He knew exactly what he was doing. He didn't do this out of ignorance. He did it on purpose. Ronald Reagan reversed that executive order, but it was too late. The companies had lost so much money they weren't willing to take the risk a second time. And the other thing, of course, is that because we only had one of these operational units, we would have to figure out the engineering challenges to scale this thing up. You know, they are nukes, folks, but it's the closest thing to a free lunch that we've got available. Thorium, by the way, is about as common as lead. In other words, it's everywhere. It's also somewhere we wish it wasn't. It's in coal. You've probably heard about how coal-fired power plants cause lung cancer and kill all these people. The reason that coal-fired power plants cause lung cancer and kill people is because there's thorium in the coal. Thorium is a weak atomic emitter. It emits alpha particles, and alpha particles, if you get them in your lungs, causes lung cancer. So we could take the coal, take the thorium out, use it to power the reactor, and then do what the Germans did in World War II and turn the coal into gasoline and diesel fuel. And before somebody says that's crazy, there's a commercial plant in South Africa run by Sasol right now that is doing this without using nuclear energy for $60 a barrel. The last time I looked, before I came down here Friday afternoon, oil closed in the 99s, which means we could do this right now at a third less than what you're paying for gas. So a new paradigm for energy. Thorium reactors plus coal to liquids makes electrical energy, produces our electricity. Instead of burning coal for electrical power, we're using conventional nukes, and it also produces all the liquid hydrocarbons we want. By the way, if you get out your pencil and your paper and you figure out how much coal you need to make this fuel, you'll find that if you were to do this, you'd burn exactly the same amount of coal that we burn today. So in other words, we can do it without having to dig any more out of the ground than we dig out today. And when coal gets expensive, CTL doesn't mean coal to liquids, it means carbon to liquids. Any carbon source. Well, today we produce industrial carbon dioxide that goes into the soda that mixed your drinks by condensing it out of the atmosphere. Which means we can get all the carbon we want, we just have to be willing to pay for it. So as coal becomes more expensive, we have a completely closed cycle solution to our transportation fuel needs. It's not a panacea, ladies and gentlemen, it's just an answer. We need a crash program to do this kind of thing right now, and what I would recommend, if President Obama, which he won't, or Mitt Romney, which he won't, would listen to me, is to take 5% of our defense budget today, spend it for 3 to 5 years to develop a cookie cutter model. That's about $35 billion per year over 3 years, roughly $100 billion. Deploy units with a target cost of about $5 billion each, that's roughly what we pay today to put a conventional nuclear plant online, and then IPO them out to the public. Because after all, it's going to make your gasoline, your diesel fuel, and the power that keeps these lights on and lets me talk to you over a nice little amplified microphone. And then scale back defense as we bring this online and tell the Arabs where they can go stick their oil. The end result, energy independence in 20 years. 50% reduction in defense spending, and the benefits budgetarily start in 2 to 3 years instead of 20 out. It's not everything, it's not the only answer, but it's a solution that could work and nobody's looking at it. But you know, we don't have to do it. China's building them. They've already started their development program. They expect to have them online within the next 3 to 5 years. They're going to do it. So we can just end up in their back pocket, even more than we already are. India, by the way, is doing it too. India has a terrible problem with their power production. And conventional nuclear power has a further problem in that uranium is very expensive and very hard to find, which is why you see all these nice little speculative uranium mining stocks out there. But we cannot afford to defend a depleting resource at costs radically higher than anybody else in the world. We just can't do it. The bottom line is this, folks: behind every unit of GDP, every unit of economic output is a unit of energy. You think about it for about 30 seconds, you'll realize this is true. If I want to make 10,000 plasma televisions, I need to put out much more energy than I need if I want to make one. Same thing with cars, same thing with steaks, same thing with everything. So from an economic perspective, this is where we are. We have solutions, but not a lot of time. For every day that we refuse, the problem gets worse. We all hear about glide paths. Ryan's budget plan balances in 40 years. We don't have 40 years. We don't have 5 years. All of these glide path claims, they're all provable frauds. Very trivially provable frauds, mathematically. And I'll finish this little section with a quote from Rush, one of my favorite bands. I guess I'm dating myself. If you choose not to decide, you made a choice. So let's look at the political landscape, because we're not political around here, right? I mean, nobody here cares about politics. Obama, got to go with him first. I mean, you got to go last, I think. Anyway, monstrous deficits. All he's done is destroyed purchasing power and jobs. There's been no job growth. If there had been job growth, the labor participation rate would be going up, not down, and it isn't. So all those claims coming out of his White House that he has created all these jobs, he's lying. It's that simple. He won't let the markets work anywhere. General Motors, anybody? By the way, the Chevy Volt, General Motors loses $80,000 a car on that vehicle. Okay? That's the embedded cost that's going into your tax burden and into the deficit. For every one of those that they sell, there's $80,000 worth of unrecognized cost, beyond the 40 Rand he paid for the car. He signed the NDAA. I don't even have words for that. Okay, at least none that can be used to polite company, so I will refrain from there. And he has no plan for either of the paired issues. He's put forward absolutely nothing to fix either of them. Oh, hang on. Got to talk about Romney. Yeah, I can't do that. Romney has said he will not cut the budget as much as $1 in his first year in office. Now, I understand he's got a problem here in Florida, especially in the southern part of the state. There's all these old people that don't like him very much, and they really don't like Ryan. But the fact that you don't like things doesn't mean you can ignore them. We can't sit here and pretend that we can continue down the path that we're on. And essentially what Romney has said is that for the first year anyway, is exactly what he's going to do if he's elected. That's a problem. Secondly, he said he would have signed the NDAA. Just a couple of days ago, I heard him make that statement on national television. I about fell out of my chair. You know, one of the first things that we believe as Americans is that you have the right to face your accuser, and if you are accused of a crime, you have the right to a fair trial, and to have those charges heard in an open courtroom, and to have your guilt or innocence determined. I really don't care what you do in a time of war in a foreign land. If somebody's trying to invade, if you start shooting spies, okay, that doesn't bother me all that much. But when we're talking about Americans here on American soil, there's absolutely no excuse for this. If you believe that somebody is guilty of an act of terrorism, and you pick them up, charge them, put them in jail. But you try them first. And incidentally, for all of these terrorist incidents that we're supposed to be protecting ourselves against, you know, those are all felonies, right? You know, trying to blow things up like this guy they just arrested in Chicago. All the stuff with the TSA and everything else, if all these incidents have happened, how come I don't see headlines every day about all these people that they've arrested and are holding? Because every one of those events is a felony. Romney also did ban assault weapons in Massachusetts. The campaign doesn't want to talk about this. He not only signed the bill, he also issued a signing statement and said he would support it, and he doesn't have a plan for this. Gary Johnson says he'll cut the budget, but he won't commit to ending any of the monopoly practices or solving the issues either. In short, his economic plan is incredible, so you've got nowhere to go there either. So the bottom line, at the end of the day, yeah, but guess what, folks? The responsibility is ours. Citizenship is not a spectator sport. You cannot just show up at the polls in November and say these are the choices. We have to be involved, and we have to be involved early and often, and demand that these parties bring forward candidates that actually will do the right thing. If you'd like some more information, daily updates, market-ticker.org, and all of this and more in Leverage, How Cheap Money Will Destroy the World. It was published by Wiley in November of last year. Thank you very much.